Hi everyone, thank you for joining me again, for taking the time to download this episode and plug yourself into another experience that someone has had of this dimension that is seemingly barricaded from most of our existence here on Earth, but is awaiting us for when we do finish this place. But some people are lucky enough to be able to peek behind the veil and have a look at what this other dimension is like, and through the amazing technology we have these days, we're all able to read, watch, hear about it, and relive the experiences they have had. So today, as per usual, I have another experience from the ndurf.org website, which, if you are a regular listener, I am sure you would have checked out. Lots of experiences on there to go and explore. Today is a very short experience, kind of running out of the longer ones, and they obviously have to be able to read well. And the other category that I like to read about in these experiences is ones with love and God in them, because I think we can all use a bit more of that in our lives. So this one is from Oliver V. When I was 11 years old, I was rushed to the intensive care unit due to a case of septicemia, which is a dangerous blood infection. The doctor told my parents that I had acute gastroenteritis, which is inflammation of the stomach membranes and intestines. While what I actually had was a serious case of colonic volvulus, a twisting of the bowel that made and caused bowel obstructions. My parents trusted him, and so I stayed for about 24 hours without treatment, fainting several times. Finally, my mother insisted I be sent to the hospital. I have no memory of this trip to the hospital. The only thing I remember is driving there with high speed. The next thing I can recall is all the surgery instruments aligned on a white sheet, and the doctors around me in the intensive care unit. I don't know if I was awake at that point. That's where my memory of what happened at the hospital stops. Suddenly, I was propelled at a very high speed along a dark tunnel, darker than black itself. This experience is hard to explain, even though my memory of it is as vivid as if I lived the experience this morning. I did not see any wall to the tunnel, which seems contradictory, but I was aware of being in a spiral-like wormhole. I could see in the distance a tiny point of light that grew quickly into a glowing disc or orb. It was emanating an incredible milky white colour, yet was very brilliant at the same time, without hurting my eyes. The light was radiating an indescribable, reassuring calm. All my pain was gone, and my only desire was to reach the light. When I arrived closer to it, I was again propelled at an incredible speed towards it. Then suddenly, I was completely stopped. I found myself floating in a place without tangible limits, indescribable, immaculate, and saturated with the essence of this absolute light, made of immeasurable love. It It's hard to explain the dimension of the experience with human words. I was an observer without a physical body, bathed in pure elation in the midst of this love. Love so deep that all memories faded, in this misty and luminous space without border. I felt completely transcended by this immense amnesic love, and thought I would just stay in this unknown but somehow familiar place. It felt even more familiar than my home on earth. I wanted to proceed further, but I was not allowed. A voice that seemed like a telepathic conscious coming simultaneously from me and from the light told me to go back. It is not your time yet. I responded, I don't want to go back. Please let me stay here. I am not hurting here. I feel happy here. But the instruction was reiterated, a little firmer, and was coming from this omnipresent and universal vocal wave. I was then sucked back into my body. Going back into my body was extremely painful. I woke up with no notion of whether what had happened to me had lasted for an hour or a day. I was covered with tubes and other equipment. I saw my parents behind the window and my mother was crying in my dad's arms. I then felt a tremendous sadness to be in this cold, intensive care unit. In the middle of all this medical equipment, everything seemed so superficial with little meaning compared to my journey. Outside, the doctor and anaesthetist, covered with blood from head to toe, told my parents that I would not have made it if I had arrived at the hospital just an hour later. This is my testimony. I told you the whole story without trying to add anything, just the reality of the story the way I experienced it. I would like to highlight that I am usually a very skeptical person, but I have not gone 1 week without thinking of this experience and questioning myself on its nature. This experience has completely changed my life. That's the end of Oliver's experience. You can see why I was drawn to it, as it has some of the elements that I love to read about and explore, particularly what this other dimension offers in terms of that loving, comforting space that we all crave as humans, but it is very elusive. Whereas in this other realm, it seems to be a state that is ever present, and people don't want to leave once they get there, and it's it sounds like a good place to be. I think you would agree. So Oliver, when he has his experience, he's only very young. He is 11 years old. Now I get a little bit confused with this first paragraph because I'll go through it again. So he says he's rushed to the intensive care unit due to a blood infection. And then he says, so basically it sounds like there's been a bit of a mix-up at the start. Like the doctor's saying he's got a blood infection and inflammation of the stomach membranes and intestines, when in fact what the real issue is a twisting of the bowel. So anyway, he gets rushed to hospital, and he says that as he is going there, all he kind of remembers is that they are driving at very high speed, and the surgery, and then he gets there and he can remember seeing this white sheet, and it has all the scalpels and knives lined up on there, and he's ready to go into surgery. He says it's all a little bit blurry, like he feels as though he could be kind of out of his body at this point, or he might just be in and out of consciousness. He's not too sure. But for him, he kind of blacks out when he gets to this point at the hospital, and this is when the near-death experience begins properly. So he begins his experience in a very traditional manner. He begins flying through this tunnel at a very high speed. He says it's hard to really explain what this tunnel is like, but it doesn't have a wall, which, like he says, it seems a bit contradictory, because how can you be in a tunnel if it doesn't feel like there's a wall enclosing you? But there's a lot of things in these experiences that are contradictory and do not make a lot of sense. But he's feeling like he's moving through some kind of area, and the closest thing he can use to describe what that is like is a wallless tunnel, basically. And then it begins to spiral a little bit and becomes a little bit like a wormhole. I think the problem with people describing these experiences and there's no such thing as time or space or distance, so describing a place and moving through that place is very difficult without time and distance, because usually you need those two ingredients to feel like you're moving. But in this other dimension, there's neither of those two things, which makes explaining what they are experiencing rather difficult. And as we so often hear, as they're moving through this tunnel-like environment, eventually they see a light in the distance. And this light begins to grow quickly. And in Oliver's case, it's like a glowing disc or orb. In Oliver's case, this light, he gives us a bit of a description here as to what this light is like, because often you hear people say, I see this light at the end of a tunnel, but don't go into much more detail than that. But Oliver gives us a few more words to work with here. In his case, it's a glowing disc or an orb, and it's emanating this milky white colour. And he says it's kind of dull but very brilliant at the same time, so he can look at it and it doesn't hurt his eyes, but at the same time he senses this light is incredibly bright and kind of should be hurting his eyes. At the same time as he's getting these visual perceptions from this light, it's also radiating an indescribable, reassuring calmness. It takes away all his pain, and for him it's like he becomes a moth to the light on Earth, is I guess a good analogy. He just feels incredibly drawn to this light and becomes his only desire to go out there and reconnect with it. So as his desire to reach this light increases, he finds his speed becoming quicker, and he finds himself moving towards the light even faster. But then as he's just about to get there, he finds himself coming to a halt. Then I don't know if he actually reaches the light at this point or if it's just before he reaches it. I'm not too sure. But anyway, he just suddenly finds himself in this next dimension. So he's no longer in the tunnel. He's no longer speeding towards a light in the distance. He just I'm guessing maybe he did reach the light, because then he finds himself floating in a place. And I like the way Oliver has written this. Every week almost I read a description on what this connection with the light or reaching God or reaching this dimension of love is like. And they're all usually pretty similar. They usually say it's hard to describe, and this is exactly what Oliver says. But let's go through how Oliver describes this other dimension. So he finds himself floating. So he's in this place. There's no barriers, there's no walls, there's no limits. It's just this infinite space, and it is indescribable, but it is perfect. And it is saturated with this absolute light or immeasurable love. And he says this is the closest I can come using human words to actually describe what being in this place was actually like. So he says he's there. He's just absorbing all these delights, and he realizes he's not in his physical body anymore, but he is just soaking in this pure elation in the midst of this high vibrational love type environment. He says this world or this dimension is so intense, the love is so deep that it just takes away all memories of what earth life is like. And he's just totally content to be in this new environment without needing or wanting anything. He just will except obviously wanting to stay. Now, if this environment that Oliver is describing is the true source of where we come from, if this is the true place that we go back to, you can see in a weird sort of way why we come to Earth, because we come to Earth to experience the exact opposite of this dimension we all live in. Now, why would we want to leave a place where we're so happy to be and so full of love? Like, why would we choose to come to a place like planet Earth and experience darkness and challenges and removal of connection to source? I guess, looking at it from my little puny human experience, it gives you that perspective of how special the place that we come from is. It makes you more appreciative of that environment. And I guess this planet Earth also gives you that opportunity to explore what love really is. It helps you to understand what love means in a very difficult environment. You're removed from a world where love is all that there is, and put in this world where love is very sparse and fragmented, and it's not, it's fleeting. It's always coming and going, and usually has sort of some condition attached to it, whereas in this other realm it's the opposite of all those things. It's eternal, it's unconditional, and I guess it just gives our souls, our spirits, our consciousness some perspective, and helps us understand what love is, because it's a hard word to describe love. For me, it's a hard word to describe. There's so many different ways of looking at it, and everyone's going to have their own understanding of what that word means. And I think I've given my personal descriptions of what that means in previous episodes, so I won't go into that again. But basically, I think part of my mission here, and probably a lot of us listening to this, is to practice whatever love means to you and give that out to the world, and to try and understand what love actually means. And yeah, that, like I said, that's going to be different to everyone. But to think that this is the place where we have all come from, and this is where we find ourselves now, it's like polar opposites, and makes it difficult to continue on in this place, knowing that there's such a special place that we could go to right now if we wanted to. And obviously, we'd have to die to get there, but it sounds very enticing. So I just really love the way he's written this little bit here. He just feels totally transcended in this immense love. He says, he's sort of conflicted because this place is very foreign but incredibly familiar at the same time. He says it's unknown, but he feels like he really belongs there. So I guess maybe that's that transition from leaving this world and having those attachments to this earthly realm, and as they slowly melt away and you become readjusted to this new environment, you become a little bit more, I don't know, is reminded the right word, that this place is where you've come from, and this is your true home. And but he says that this other dimension is more familiar to him now as this experience wears on than his home on earth. And then he goes on to say, look, this dimension is fantastic, but he still has this urge to continue on. So I don't know what that actually means. How can you continue on? There is no up or down, left or right, here or there in this other dimension. So how you can actually proceed further into this new environment is a bit of a head scratcher, but this is what Oliver feels like he wants to do. He wants to go further into this experience, but for whatever reason, he says he is not allowed. He says, as he feels that urge to continue to explore, he hears a voice that seems like a telepathic conscience. And I like how he says this. It's simultaneously coming from him, from his soul, and from the light. So there's that soul versus source merging into one. It's both of them saying at the same time that you can't stay here. It's not your time yet. So it's kind of a dual response to his urge to wanting to stay, is this knockback of no, it's not your time. And then he says in his soul, he telepathically thinks, which is the way of expressing ourselves in this other dimension. I'm happy here. I don't want to go back. I don't feel any pain. I free from all darkness in this place. I do not want to go back to Earth. But again, he is knocked back. This time the voice is a little firmer, and he says this time, coming from this omnipresent and universal vocal wave. After he hears this second knockback, he is then sucked back into his body. So in this case, this is the soul wanting to stay. He doesn't seem to have that free will we all hear about. Like some experiences say that there's this free will and we can choose to stay or go, but in his case, he doesn't have that. He is basically forced back into his body. And as we read every week, this re-entry into the body is extremely painful. It's a clear distinction to wake up in a constricted body that experiences sensations that are not comfortable, and most people, after they've had a near-death experience, are obviously came close to death and quite often in hospital and therefore sick, and their bodies even more uncomfortable than it otherwise would be. So to go from that blissful environment back into this world, into a body that isn't as functional as it once was, is going to cause considerable discomfort. So this kid, he's only 11 years old, and he's just wondering, I guess, or I certainly would be like, what has just happened? He's back in his body, he's hurting, he looks up, he sees his parents behind the window and his mum's crying, and he just feels this intense sadness and discomfort of being back in this planet and in this body and this terribly cold clinical intensive care unit environment with medical equipment everywhere and people upset and just total confusion, really. And this is not a place Oliver wants to be, but anyway, this is what happens to him. And then he looks up and he sees his doctor and anaesthetist, and they're covered in blood, and then they start to have a chat about what's actually happened, and they say, look, if you'd gotten here a little bit later, you probably would have passed away permanently. So Oliver ends by saying, this is my whole story, this is my testimony, this is what happened, basically word for word, as best as I'm able to manipulate the English language into a meaningful description of what actually happened. But as he said earlier in the experience, that using words to describe what this reality was like is not an easy task. So he finishes by saying that he is a very skeptical person in this in this environment, in our human world. He is naturally not a particularly spiritual person, but this experience he had as a kid has had a significant impact on his life, and he can't go more than 1 week without having reflecting on this experience that he's had and trying to figure out what it actually means and what actually happened. But at the end of the day, he says this experience has completely changed his life. I would like to hear a little bit more detail as to what that actually means, and how his life actually ended up playing out. Because this experience happened back in 1992, so going back, 32 years now. So I would be very interested to see what path his life took. But that's Oliver's experience. Hope you enjoyed listening to that one. It was a short, brief, but spectacularly profound experience, because the description of this loving dimension is generally what I like to delve into, and I'm a little bit biased like that. Some of these experiences can talk a lot about this other dimension, and some can talk about being in this spiritual form where we kind of stay in this physical realm. Like some people are able to pop out of their body and watch the doctors working on them, and they stay in this other realm, whereas within this physical realm and able to kind of fly around planet Earth. But others go through this tunnel and connect with this otherworldly dimension, and both types of experiences are interesting and offer us a glimpse of what dying is like at the end of the day. And these near-death experiences teach us that death is nothing to be afraid of. And therefore, if we're not afraid of dying, why aren't we? We should be. It should give us a little bit more courage to go and to live our lives and to experience being a human and to not worry so much about the consequences, because what's the worst that could happen? We could die, and as we know through these experiences, that is a good thing at the end of the day. So that's what I take out of this. Go out and live your life and enjoy it. Try not to let fear control you and push you to be controlled and not enjoy your life. Don't let it hold you back, and try to use this incredible gift you have as a human in a physical realm to go and explore what you need to explore. Ask for guidance, ask for connection, and get that guidance you need to live the best life you can, and hopefully that can happen for you. But as always, I'd end by sending you all my love and praise you for listening to this podcast, and hopefully and praying it pushes you in a direction to a better connection and an easier pathway through this challenging process of being a human. So talk to you next week, and thank you for listening.